This is our second Google Lunar XPRIZE team hangout. Now, tonight, instead of having a team with us, well, there's 18 teams and all of them are amazingly busy. They're working on preparing their cameras, their landers, well, all the things you need to get to the moon and rove across it, or walk across it, or fly across it, whatever it takes. Instead, tonight we have with us Andrew Barton, who comes to us from Google Lunar XPRIZE itself. He's here to help us understand what is the Google Lunar XPRIZE, what are the milestones and incentives that these teams are reaching for, and what is it that hopefully we will accomplish through all of this. Andrew has a PhD in mechanical engineering that he got from the University of Sydney. He's worked in governmental space agencies, working at ESTEC, which is part of the European Space Agency in the Netherlands. And he has experience also working in the commercial world, but right now his home is with the Google Lunar XPRIZE, where he works in technical operations. Andrew, welcome to our show. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this evening.
Hi, Pamela. Thanks, and hi to all of the audience. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for joining this hangout. I'd just like to say that just to round out what Pamela was saying, I'm the Director of Technical Operations for the Google Lunar XPRIZE, and I work for the XPRIZE Foundation in Los Angeles, and our sponsor, Google, headquartered up in San Francisco area, of course, is the prize benefactor, the main sponsor.
And for those of you who have any questions for Andrew, we are watching for your questions on the YouTube feed and on the Google event page that is part of the Google Lunar XPRIZE page on Google+. The best place for you to get us your questions is through YouTube. We have the Q&A app installed, and we're here listening for what you have to ask. Now, I think one of the first things to start with is one of the most common misconceptions about the XPRIZE. I know I've seen people who work with the Google Lunar XPRIZE who start getting asked, hey, can you hook me up with Google stuff? You guys are not actually part of Google.
That's right. XPRIZE Foundation is an independent organization sponsored by Google. And we've had other sponsors in the past for the other prizes that we do, and the first XPRIZE was the Ansari XPRIZE, which was for suborbital space tourism, and I'm sure most, if not all, of the audience would be familiar with the fantastic work that was done by Scaled Composites with the Spaceship One, which was then, the technology was then licensed to Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic Company, and that was back in 2004. That prize was won, and since then XPRIZE has been running a number of other prizes, both in aerospace and outside of it. Within aerospace, we had the Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Challenge, which was won in 2009 by Maston Space Systems, with a runner-up prize going to Armadillo Aerospace. And the Google Lunar XPRIZE was actually launched before that, but has been running for a long time, and we're now approaching the end of the Google Lunar XPRIZE. The prize money is available till the end of next year.
And this builds on an amazing heritage of people recognizing that sometimes you have to incentivize adventure's not quite the right word, but that's sometimes how it feels. The innovation required to do more, go further, try harder, to innovate something great. And this actually goes all the way back to the Flight of the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic, which was the winning flight to win the Orteig Prize. And that was just $25,000, but when you think back to when it was won, that was a huge sum of money. And the thing about these prizes is when Charles Lindbergh was getting ready to fly across the Atlantic, he fully recognized that while $25,000 was a large sum of money, that wouldn't necessarily cover all the effort, all the flight costs, all of the innovations that were needed. And with the Ansari Prize, with the Northrop Grumman Prize, the Ansari Prize went to the first spacecraft that was able to go up above a certain altitude, basically to reach above the atmosphere and return to Earth twice in a short period of time. The Northrop Grumman Prize was to take your spacecraft, go up into the air for a certain amount of time, either 90 seconds or 180 seconds, return back down, and repeat. All of these prizes require a lot of cost to be invested, and the prize is an incentive only. Do you have any feel for just how much these different teams might have to invest as they reach for the moon?
Roughly speaking, the kinds of missions which we expect these teams to do are in the tens of millions of dollars in cost. The sort of minimum price for a launch vehicle that could get your spacecraft to the moon is already approaching $20 million.
And $20 million is the prize that Google has put forward for the mission that makes it to the moon, travels 500 meters, and sends back high-definition video.
Right, so that's the grand prize. There's also a few other prizes. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But we expect that teams will probably spend more money than that to do the mission, perhaps by a factor of 2 or 2.5 times more.
And what's interesting is, as you pointed out, this is a fairly old prize. It's been around for a long time. And there are still FAQs floating around the internet saying, we expect to see the first launches in 2013, that the prize will be decreased, in fact, by the end of 2013 to 15 million. The rules on that have been changed to it gets decreased if a governmental agency lands on the moon. Now, how has this changed, and what are the major factors that have changed the Google Lunar XPRIZE over its history?
That is, all of that old stuff sort of sticks around, so you can find it and dig it up. But the downside is it can be a little bit confusing, I suppose. But essentially, there were lots of people involved, lots of teams, lots of stakeholders, and XPRIZE, had the attitude of, we're not sure we've got it right the first time. We're not perfect. Let's launch this prize and see what happens. And as we go along, we learn certain hidden requirements come out of the woodwork, if you like, and so certain things just needed to be changed. And in fact, we're now on the 4th version of the Master Team Agreement, which is the contract that the teams and XPRIZE sign to basically declare how they're related in this prize competition. And so you've just mentioned a few of the biggest changes that have happened over the years. So the original expiry date was end of 2014. And that was also, the prize would have already dropped to $15 million by the end of 2014. It was only originally meant to be the $20 million up until the end of 2012. But of course, as we approached 2012 and it became clear that there weren't any teams ready to go yet, Google and XPRIZE decided to take away that particular rule, and so the prize money was kept at $20 million. And at a certain time, I think it may have been the same change in the rules, it was extended till the end of 2015, which is the current deadline still. And that drop in price, that drop in prize money was removed, as I said. There was another one which you just briefly mentioned, which was the government landing penalty, and that was basically a $5 million reduction in the grand prize. If a government got there first and did a mission which was substantially similar to the Google Lunar XPRIZE teams. That particular rule was decided to be removed, I think, close to 2 years ago, quite some time before the Chinese made their launch attempt. And they, of course, the Chinese did land on the moon recently with a robotic lander. And it does have substantially similar capabilities to the Google Lunar XPRIZE requirements. However, as many of the audience will know, the rover didn't go very far. And as I understand it, it did not, and it probably will not reach 500 meters. So, as it happens, even that mission would not have dropped down the prize money according to that rule.
And 500 meters is, to put it into American terms, that's roughly 5 football fields, which is similar in size to 5 European football fields, just change out the sport.
Yep.
And that doesn't seem like a large distance, but the Mars rovers took substantial time to go that amount of distance, and Lunokhod is one of the Russian rovers that was fly-by-wire. There was a human being on Earth watching the images coming down, essentially steering that Soviet craft several decades ago across the surface. It's one that was able to make it several miles, tens of miles in reality, and it holds the record for roving on the moon. But technology like that is very hard, and building something that will survive the lunar night is a challenge that has to be met as well, and that's the one that gets struggled with a lot.
Mm-hmm. So in fact, the basic grand prize of the Google Lunar XPRIZE doesn't require your system to survive the lunar night.
That's
and
true.
The lunar night is extremely cold, way below freezing point. In fact, it's so cold that a lot of conventional electronics would just sort of freeze up and crack, and the circuits wouldn't work anymore. So it's far from simple to design systems that can work in that environment. But that's one of our bonus prizes, in fact.
So let's look at the original rules. I think we've hit a lot of what's going on. There's a $20 million grand prize for the landing, the getting your thing, whatever it may be, and there's all sorts of diverse designs. 500 meters, sending back the HD video, but various incentives have been put in place, various milestone prizes. So there's the operation at night, traveling more than 5 kilometers over the lunar surface, detection of water, precision landing near the Apollo site. Sorry, those are bonus prizes, not milestones. And then there are the milestones as well, and the milestones are actually, for lack of a better word, juried prizes where you have judges following around the team. And in this case, you've selected teams to look to have their landers followed, their mobility systems followed, and their cameras followed. And this is really interesting because it's something where you have judges going out and tracking the teams as they go. What was the history of coming up with this and team selection, and how do you move forward as teams work towards launch?
Yeah, so the milestone prizes came into the story quite late. The planning for the milestone prizes started only a little bit over a year ago, and what we realized at that point was it was still very difficult for teams to make all that progress necessary to get ready for launch and then do their mission. And the biggest problem is just raising the funds to do that, to pay for all of that equipment and all of that expertise that you need, insurance and all sorts of other things you wouldn't even imagine. And so money is a really big problem, but also technology. Just having access to the technology to do this stuff. And so the milestone prizes were basically set up to give teams an extra boost towards their mission goals. And so what we did is we took the total prize purse, of which $20 million is the grand prize, also a second prize and bonus prizes. The total prize purse is worth $30 million. We took $6 million out of that, and we said, okay, we're going to make that available to teams before they launch, teams which are substantially ahead, they're substantially along the way to their mission preparations, and who've proven that they're going to be doing some important work in the coming year. And so basically we set up a sort of prize within a prize where these teams were competitively selected from amongst the other teams who chose to participate in the milestone prizes. Not everybody had to participate, it was optional. Those teams who applied to participate submitted a plan describing what they do, and we had a sort of independent panel of experts, our judging panel, who reviewed those plans and selected teams who were the strongest in each of those three technical categories: landing system, mobility system, and imaging system. So what happened is 5 teams got selected. There's a mixture of which subsystem they're going to be going for, but those 5 teams now have the chance to share in that $6 million of prize money that we're going to be bringing forward. So this money is not in addition to their grand prize, but it will be subtracted from their grand prize should they win it in the future.
And what's interesting about how this is set up is Google recognized that they didn't want to staunch the possibility of a team realizing, hey, we suddenly are competitive at this, and basically being a come-from-behind team that accomplishes the requirements for the Google Lunar XPRIZE at the last moment. And so they've upped the ante. They've said, we're willing to put forward up to $40 million. And so it's possible for a team that didn't achieve one of the milestones to be the overall winner, and the teams that get the milestones get to keep the money. Now, the unfortunate side effect of this is also, the other side is, if you're a milestone winner, then you still max out at being able to win $20 million at most. So it's kind of interesting that they're still encouraging, while registration for the prize closed back in 2010, and there's only 18 set active teams, it's still possible for there to be a outside winner that wasn't one of these milestone selected teams.
Right, so it's not required that you make it into the milestones to be able to win the grand prize. It's not a down select, if you like. It's an optional program that we've added later to help those teams along. And as you mentioned, the overall prize purse, because we had the possibility that teams who didn't participate in the milestone prizes went on to win the grand prize, we had to just have the possibility to extend the prize purse a little bit, so it goes up to actually $40 million if required.
Right. So the teams that are currently moving forward with these milestones, we have Astrobotic, which is competing in the landing, mobility, and imaging categories. Moon Express has been selected for the same, landing, mobility, imaging. Team Indus has been selected for landing and imaging. Part-time scientists were selected for mobility and imaging. And then, forgive me if I mispronounce this, Hakuto was selected for the mobility prize. So there is a set of 5 of the 18 active teams that have been selected by the team of judges to move on in these categories and have their progress in landing, mobility, and imaging monitored towards completion of these milestones.
Right, and so all of a lot of the attention is now on these 5 teams because they've got deadlines. They've got until the end of September to prove to the satisfaction of the judging panel that they've hit their milestones. And the way they do that is by sharing their technical progress with the judges. So the judges are invited to technical meetings to go over the team's work and look at their data, look at their test results, ask them questions to make sure that the teams understand what they've done and actually have done what they say they were doing, and also witnessing tests. So the judges will go out to the team's premises or their partner's premises and look at the testing take place. And one of the important things to note about these milestone prizes is the different teams define their own milestones. So the actual work they're going to do is a bit different depending on their overall approach to the mission and what they consider to be their critical risks. and the judging panel then selected them based upon their overall plan and how they're planning to overcome those risks.
So let's look at what's included in these three different things. The word mobility, I know, can be a bit challenging to people simply because we're so used to using the word rover. And I love that Google Lunar XPRIZE didn't fall prey to restrictive language that might squash imagination. What all goes into the mobility milestone?
So yeah, we chose the word mobility because what we really want to have out of the prize is a capability to move around and do useful stuff on the lunar surface. And actually, if that's all you want, you don't need to specify whether it's a rover or it's a flying vehicle or it's a mole that drills under the surface or a ball that rolls along the surface. All you need to verify is that something can move in a deliberate way across the surface. So deliberate meaning you show that it can follow a path which you're commanding it to follow. And so the judging panel will be looking for that kind of thing with the mobility prize. So there are 4 mobility prizes available as part of the milestone prizes. Moon Express is one that's going for the flying option, so their landing vehicle will then, after it's landed on the moon, it will hop. So they're going to demonstrate that hop as part of their mobility prize. But the other 3 teams in the mobility category are doing more conventional rover type vehicles.
So I'd like to remind our audience that if you have any questions for Andrew, you can enter them using the Q&A app. You can put them in a comment on the Google Lunar XPRIZE event page. And I'm also monitoring Twitter because I'm kind of a Twitter girl. Love Google+, still addicted to my 140 characters. So send us a tweet with GLXP. Either hashtag and then I'm at Starstrider. Are you on Twitter, Andrew?
I am actually. I think I don't use it very often, so I should know this. I think my handle is Bartox, Bartox, but I'll just look it up for you.
So we're happily
Yes,
over on
Bartox.
Twitter. Okay, so you can tweet at Google Lunar XPRIZE, hashtag at GLXP, hashtag GLXP. I'm monitoring those, and always YouTube and the Google Plus event page. So we have the mobility challenge. Getting to the moon is one of the more interesting challenges as well. So there's 2 parts to that. One of these isn't a milestone prize. The other one is. So when we look at getting to the moon, there's the general problem of you have to get off the planet. This is generally done. You launch to Earth orbit. You transition from Earth orbit to a lunar interception orbit, end up going around the moon, and then you land. Several of the teams have looked at their own launchers. Others are looking to purchase them. Many eyes are on the SpaceX Falcon Heavy Lift that's coming in hopefully Q1 of 2015. The landing milestone does not mean you have to develop the Falcon Heavy Lift. What all is involved in the landing milestone?
Yeah, right. So the challenge of launch from the Earth's surface just to get into space is actually probably the biggest challenge there. But we're fortunate that that most of those technologies have already been developed by humanity over the last decades. So what we're doing now is looking at the next step, which is once you're in space, how do you land on the moon? So we expect that most of our teams will purchase their launch vehicle on the commercial market, and obviously companies like SpaceX with their Falcon rockets are good possible suppliers for that. But there are many other companies around the world who can do that. So essentially the launch problem reduces to a financial problem, finding the money to pay for that vehicle. But the real risky stuff is the approach and the slowing down and the touchdown on the lunar surface, and that's only been done successfully by 3 nations. One of them, China, only very recently. Before that, of course, the Americans and the Soviet Union did that back in the 60s and early 70s. So we're, in the Google Lunar X Prize, we're saying we want private industry to develop that same technology. And for the milestone prizes, we allowed the teams to propose risk reduction activities associated with landing that included anything from the lunar approach to final touchdown. And the kinds of problems you're going to have are making sure that you're aiming for the right part of the moon, or even making sure that you don't miss the moon entirely and shoot off into deep space. Then you need to slow down, so you need to figure out when you have to do your braking maneuver, and you need to somehow make your velocity, your speed, equal to the surface of the moon. So effectively zero speed with respect to the moon's surface, to have a soft touchdown. The soft touchdown, of course, is required because you really need to be able to have some complicated system to be able to go off and do that deliberate mobility we talked about earlier on. And so when you're talking about soft touchdown, you need to have a throttleable engine, throttle propulsion system. You cannot use parachutes or just airbags because there's no atmosphere on the moon, and also your speed as you approach the moon is extremely high, far too high to absorb the impact with airbags. So you need to have some sort of propulsion system which is quite advanced, and some sort of guidance system to make sure that you just get that, you slow your velocity down just at the right point in time when you touch the surface.
So what you've nicely explained why this is a new prize that is actually somewhat different from the Northrop Grumman competition that NASA awarded, which had people going through the landing and hopping around activities on the surface of the Earth. The lack of atmosphere is a bit of a challenge. So we have the landing milestone, the mobility milestone. The camera milestone seems like a strange one to have, given all of the experience that we've had on Mars, all of the camera experience we have with Earth-facing satellites, such as those that have been getting used in the hunt for Malaysian Flight 370. What makes this such a unique prize for people to chase after?
It's got different requirements to those things that you mentioned. When you're imaging things up close on the moon, it's quite different from imaging things from orbit. So you've got a camera with a finite focal length. Also, it's got to be small and rugged and survive the extremes of temperature, the lunar dust, radiation. So the camera system you'd have on a Google Lunar XPRIZE mission is quite different from one you'd have in Earth orbit. Excuse me. It's perhaps more similar to what you might have on the surface of Mars for Mars missions, but those missions are all government-run missions, and they're in a very different cost structure. They're far more expensive. They're far more sophisticated. So what we're basically challenging our teams to do is to develop a new camera system which is cheaper, easier to use, probably using more off-the-shelf equipment, but qualifying that equipment for the space environment, and proving that it can survive those damaging environmental factors that I mentioned. And also, it's the first time that this that will have mooncasts, so broadcasts from the moon. And back in the Apollo days, there was a live transmission of TV, but it was very low resolution. And the most famous image of Neil Armstrong stepping off the lander is an example of that. It got a bit better during the Apollo program, but it never reached what we're used to seeing just by clicking a button and looking on our tablets on the modern internet. So what we really want to do is be able to bring live imagery and video from the moon directly to Earth, and that requires good cameras, small cameras, and good digital transmission systems back to Earth.
And that last bit is something that can't be overstated in terms of how challenging it is. I think all of us have somewhere in our possession an HD camera that can survive being thrown in a backpack during a traumatic bike ride. Sometimes they're attached to laptops, sometimes they're attached to phones. And while the launch of a spacecraft is a whole lot more shaking and G-forces. Solving things for vibrations is one of those fun engineering problems that all of us love to torture our students with, and the students love to accept the challenge.
Mm.
What is harder is we've all struggled with the fact that if you go in your backyard or on your balcony or to your neighbor's apartment with your computer, you very quickly lose Wi-Fi signal. The moon's a whole lot further away, and they're using completely different technologies than Wi-Fi, but the basic problem of getting significant transmission energy is the same issue. How do you get enough energy into this little tiny thing? And little because weight is what you're paying for to get it there. So you're weight restricted, you're power constricted, and you have to be heard on the planet Earth. What do you think, from a technical operations point of view, is the greatest challenge among these that these teams are going to have to overcome, given the off-the-shelf and new technology they're chasing down on lower budgets?
Oof. Yeah, it's a system problem. You have to develop something that meets all of these different requirements and performs all these different functions, many of which are new and haven't been done before. All the basic physics is well understood for centuries, or decades at least, and there's a lot of off-the-shelf equipment that you can use, but putting it all together, bundling that all into one package, one system that works relatively reliably. I mean, we're not asking them to work for 10 years on the lunar surface. They just have to go long enough to be able to complete their mobility objectives. But that's not easy. So designing that system which is small enough and light enough, but also works under those demanding conditions, and with the necessary quality, it's a system challenge, and it generally would require interdisciplinary work. You couldn't have just one engineer do the complete system. That person would be a complete guru. I don't know anybody who could do the whole thing.
No, you need the optical engineer, the electrical engineer, the computer scientist, the mechanical engineer. Take an entire engineering department, take the top person from each, and you might have a chance.
Yeah, it's system engineering, I think, and that's a discipline which is starting to come out in academia over the last decade or two.
Now, one of the other great benefits that these guys have over the Apollo astronauts is the ability to 3D print, and Noel Rupenthal actually asks, how extensively is 3D printing being used in these projects?
I've seen a few teams using 3D printing for prototypes of their systems. I'm not sure if anybody's going to send hardware to the moon which was 3D printed and then sent to the moon, although there's no reason you couldn't do that. So it's a new technology which is being used. It's hard to say how much. We don't have full insight into what all our teams are doing.
Yeah, you have the fortune of getting to watch all of the teams and the misfortune of not getting to sit in all.
Yeah, indeed.
Necessarily front row seats. So as all of this goes on, what has been perhaps, I guess, the most surprising thing that you've seen coming out of the innovations in watching? I guess society's been following this with social media. You're essentially running a game of Survivor with rovers.
Yeah, well, there's now a huge volume of information on YouTube published by all of our teams, and there's a massive diversity of approaches to how to. It's incredible. You never could have anticipated all the different ideas that people have come up with. You know, people are proposing to have little kangaroo-like vehicles that hop, you know, with the spring type of action or rocket-powered propulsion. You know, worms and balls and all sorts of. Those are the sorts of obvious things that you can think of as how to move across the lunar surface. But also, there's the sort of higher level questions of how do I get to the moon? Do I make my own launch vehicle, which is very difficult, very expensive, probably 10 times more difficult than in the Google Lunar XPRIZE mission, most people want to buy their launch vehicle. But once you've decided to buy a launch vehicle, how big should that launch vehicle be? Would you be the only passenger or not? Where does it drop you off? In which orbit? Does it take you all the way to the moon, or does it drop you in a low Earth orbit, and then you need to propel yourself out of there towards the moon? And one of the more interesting questions is, should we cooperate with other teams? And there's actually all sorts of cooperation in there, in our 18 teams. Some teams are talking about sharing a launch, and then they'd separate when they're in space and each land independently. Other teams are talking about even sharing a lander and having separate mobility vehicles to do the surface mission. So this is one of the strengths of an XPRIZE, is that because you don't prescribe the solution, you only prescribe the requirements. You benefit from a huge diversity of approaches, and that's what we're really seeing here.
And it's been amazing to see how over the history of it, different teams have merged, and you're building a community where we're seeing with these global teams what was seen somewhat with NASA contractors, where Martin Marietta and Lockheed and all of these different corporations of the 60s, 70s, and early 80s have slowly been merging. But it truly is a new future that's getting built. And Eric Collins asks, so in a couple of years, can we expect to hear an announcement for the Google Lunar Street View Prize? $100 million to the first team to return Street View quality panoramas every 500 meters over a distance of at least 20 kilometers?
I wouldn't rule it out. We're always looking for new prize ideas. And yeah, I mean, as soon as there's a need, we're going to be interested in that.
And this all starts to go back to the communications problem. Once you start having to send something back every 500 meters over 2 kilometers, oh wow, that's a whole lot of data coming back. And Daniel Sprouse asks, what percentage of the communications with the landers is the responsibility of the team versus the responsibility of the XPRIZE?
They do all of the communications between Earth and the Moon. They then basically give us the data to prove that they did the mission. We'll have 1 or 2 judges in the Mission Control Center seeing that data coming down live, and they'll verify that that's really coming from the Moon. But essentially, the onus is completely on the teams to do the mission. Everything they have to do, including the telecommunications. They then send us a data package which we will publish for the world to see.
And what's kind of awesome is I'm getting live information from our audience right now. Space Ref Business published an article today on March 1st. I don't know if you've had a chance to review this. It was published at 8:49 p.m. So this truly is hitting us right now. And it's an article on interorbital systems common propulsion module test vehicle thundered off its mobile launch unit on its maiden voyage. Do you find that things are flying fast and furious, and do you know anything about this particular test of the moment?
So Interorbital Systems is a partner company of our team called Synergy Moon. And so Interorbital Systems is based out in Mojave, California, and I know they've been developing a rocket system. They're actually one of the only teams which considers the approach of developing their own launch vehicle, and I believe this launch is part of that program. But I don't have a lot more details. I also saw that just before going live today, so I didn't have a chance to read it.
So forgive me for coming after you with something being sent in live from our audience, and thank you so much for that link. It came in from @SpaceCommerce. It is an active community out there participating in all of this. It keeps it challenging to keep up with everything that's going on. It really is a whole variety of different things that come out of this. We also have Daniel Sprouse asking, do any of the teams have plans to test their lander's duration? And this sort of builds into the extension goals that are part of the XPRIZE. Can you talk anything about the duration?
The duration of the flight?
Of the lander. Of the lander, sorry.
I don't quite understand the question.
So what Daniel asks is, do any of the teams have plans to test the duration of their lander? I think this means how far they can go. And this fits in with the mission objective of traveling more than 5 kilometers over the lunar surface.
Oh, okay. So it's the yeah, we normally refer to that as the rover, which is doing the surface traverse. So a lot of teams have been testing their rovers and publishing their results on YouTube, as I mentioned, so you wouldn't have to go very far to see a GLXP team doing that kind of work. For the milestone prizes, the judges will be looking very closely at the mobility capabilities, and so one of the things they're going to look at is how is the team going to prove that that vehicle has indeed traveled the 500 meters? What method of measurement and what data will they bring back to prove that to the judging panel? So during the milestone prizes, the teams will actually do some tests to show how that measurement system works.
And it seems odd to have to test how far did I go, but you never know quite how are your wheels going to deform, and
right.
If you've ever ridden in taxis, the easiest way for a taxi cab driver to jilt you your fare is to lower the pressure in his tires and make their radius just a little bit smaller. So there's all sorts of things you have to worry about. But on the side of using tried and tested Earth off-the-shelf technology, there's great programs like Arduino Sat that are getting CANSATs using Arduinos into orbit. Are any, we're being asked by Michael Jobin, are any of the Google Lunar XPRIZE teams that you know of, and this may be beyond the scope of what you know, building Arduino technology into their projects?
I'm pretty sure the answer is yes. I can't off the top of my head remember which teams, however. Googling GLXP Arduino might give a better answer than I've just given.
It's like I said earlier, there's 18 active teams all working towards this. The 5 teams selected to the milestones are not the only ones in the competition. And that's 18 teams with 18 different sets of technology to keep track of. So there's a whole lot of science going on. So one of the things that I'm really loving that you're hitting on with these guys and gals out there have blogs, they have YouTube feeds, and all of this builds towards a $1 million award that's being given to the team that demonstrates the greatest attempt to promote diversity in the field of space exploration, and towards other education focuses, including the Moonbot, the planetarium show that you've put out. How do you bring all of these engineers to the let's communicate this as well, and what are the communications that you're loving to see the most?
Well, the Diversity Prize reflects one of the key objectives of Google and XPRIZE in setting up the Google Lunar XPRIZE. It's not just about the technology; it's about the impact it has on society back here on Earth. And so, what we want to see is more people going into these science, technology, engineering, and mathematics fields, the STEM fields as they're called, yes. We're trying to promote diversity in that. So the teams themselves don't need to be composed primarily of, exclusively of engineers. In fact, teams can have anybody they want on the team. It doesn't matter what your background is, so long as you're adding something useful to the mission. So I suppose what the judging panel is going to look for when they when they make the final decision on the diversity prize is what type of people were involved in the teams. What sort of activities did they do to promote their team's work to a wider community, and who did they manage to reach through those activities? Trying to estimate what level of change they had towards those higher level objectives that I just mentioned.
And what's really neat about this is you do see new role models emerging out of this. You have Team Indus, you have Team Hakuto. I need to learn how to pronounce that
You've
better.
pronounced it exactly correctly.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. The Japanese team. So you have teams from nations that we don't usually think of as cutting-edge lunar explorers. Both of those nations have had governmental spacecraft, Chandrayaan, Kagoya, which is also called Selene, depending on which set of naming you're looking at. But now we have their everyday commercial space heroes. They're spacefaring Chuck Yeagers and Elon Musk. He's South African working in America. This is truly an international, diverse competition in every way.
Yeah, so I think the rules, the Master Team Agreement, which defines the rules, it says the Diversity Prize will take into account all types of diversity: age, gender, nationality, expertise, anything. And so we do indeed have the most international space exploration program ever. I think there's no doubt about that at the moment. The International Space Station, for example, has 5 or 6 space agencies involved, including Europe, of course, which has many countries. But the Google Lunar XPRIZE is far more international than that, and so I suppose that sort of fits in with the vision that that we have for the future, is that space is not the providence of one or a few nations. It's really the providence of all mankind.
And one of the awesome things is you're putting all of this expertise into getting to the moon, but you're also putting effort into educating that next generation that will hopefully be there, finishing the job of establishing our home on the moon. And the Google Lunar XPRIZE Foundation has the Moonbots competition, which I'm bringing up because it's currently open for registration. And Moonbots is a project that invites kids up to age 17 to form teams, and is this something that you'd like to discuss any? Otherwise, I'm happy to ramble gleefully about it, because I adore this project.
You probably ramble more accurately than me. That's actually run by my colleague Shanda Gonzalez. So I don't know all the details at this point. So
as I said, I bring this up because it's currently open for registration, and if any of you out there work with school teachers, school groups, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Explorer Scouts, FAA, pick a group that likes robots. It's moonbots.org. Registration open March 15th, closes May 15th, and it encourages kids to use the Lego Mindstorm platform to design their own way of winning a much more ground-based version of the Google Lunar XPRIZE. And this is a great way to tell kids this could be you in the future. And for those of us born post-Apollo, I've never seen a human on the moon, and I'm looking forward to seeing my friends' kids walking around on the moon someday.
Yep, absolutely. So the Moonbots is a great way for kids to, well, have fun, but also learn a little bit about what it takes to explore space. And so, you know, we're very happy that it's been so successful. I got to see the 2 or 3 of the winning teams last year, and just like our teams in the main Google Lunar XPRIZE, those guys have all got very diverse approaches and it's actually a lot of fun.
It really is, and the Lego Mindstorm kits are excellent. There's out-of-the-box kits if you're not part of the competition that science centers often have, so that you can play along and be part of figuring out what's going on. As we move forward, this Hangout series is new. We're still working on defining it, and I have to thank all of you for being here and helping us define where this is going to go in the future. Andrew, you've been great on here, and I'm wondering what parting things about this prize do you want our audience to walk away with and share around the water cooler tomorrow or this afternoon, depending on where they are on this rotating planet?
Well, I suppose I think we should look to the near future, and we should realize that by the end of next year, multiple private companies are planning to demonstrate an ability to deliver a package to the lunar surface, like FedEx. So given enough money, you too could send a package to the moon as soon as next year. And then if you want to look a bit further in the future, maybe 10 or 15 years down the track, people will also be able to fly commercially to the moon. Just like we're now seeing people starting to fly into suborbital space. So in our lifetime, we will be able to visit the moon, given enough financial resources. And as time goes by, it will get cheaper and cheaper.
And in last week's show, one of our guests mentioned that they'd heard rumors of someone buying the first proposed ticket for a tourist flight to orbit the moon for $150 million. And while this broke my heart, given how much money NASA doesn't have at the moment, it's still amazing to dream about what's coming. And you've now planted in my head this vision of the Amazon drones delivering things to astronauts and hominid robots all over the moon as they build the communications networks, do the geophysics, and try and set up our habitats for the future.
Absolutely.
One filled with drones, but it's
yeah, we have to love the robots.
I personally welcome our robot overlords. So this has been great, Andrew, and I would like to remind our audience that this is just the start of this series. This is our second episode. The first one is archived on YouTube. It should be linked off of both the Google Lunar XPRIZE page and CosmoQuest. I am the principal investigator of the CosmoQuest citizen science community, where we're not trying to get to the moon, but we're trying to map the moon so that we know the scientifically interesting places and the safe places to land for these teams of the future. So if you're not on your way to going to the moon, spend a few minutes mapping the moon and join us each week as we find out how the folks at the Google Lunar XPRIZE Foundation, or at the XPRIZE Foundation working on the Google Lunar XPRIZE, are working to encourage these 18 teams towards a future of commercial space. Next week's show is not going to be at this hour. We alternate between hours that are ideal for the two different hemispheres of the planet, east and west. So next week it will be a morning show at 11 a.m. Central Time, 4 p.m. London. That's really the one you need to remember. Tuesday, 4 p.m. London next week. We are taking the week after Easter off, and we'll be returning after that. Subscribe to us, follow us on the Google Lunar XPRIZE page, and you'll learn all you need to know to keep up with these explorations. Thank you so much, Andrew. This has really been great, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. We're here to stay with this series, so in the coming months, you will be back.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thanks for joining, everybody.
So thank you, and see you next week.
I work for the XPRIZE Foundation in Los Angeles, and our sponsor, Google, headquartered up in San Francisco area, of course, is the prize benefactor, the main sponsor.
And for those of you who have any questions for Andrew, um, we are watching for your questions on the YouTube feed and on the Google event page that is part of the Google Lunar XPRIZE page on Google+. The best place for you to get us your questions is through YouTube. We have the Q&A app installed, and we're here listening for what you have to ask. Now, I think one of the first things to start with is one of the most common misconceptions about the X Prize. I know I've seen people who work with the Google Lunar X Prize who start getting asked, hey, can you hook me up with Google stuff? You guys are not actually part of Google.
That's right. No, XPRIZE Foundation is an independent organization sponsored by Google. And we've had other sponsors in the past for the other prizes that we do. And the first X Prize was the Ansari X Prize, which was for suborbital space tourism. And I'm sure most, if not all, of the audience would be familiar with the fantastic work that was done by Scaled Composites with the Spaceship One, which was then the technology was then licensed to Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic Company, and that was back in 2004. That prize was won, and since then, X Prize has been running a number of other prizes, both in aerospace and outside of it. Within aerospace, we had the Northrop Grumman Lunar Lander Challenge, which was won in 2009 by Maston Space Systems, with a runner-up prize going to Armadillo Aerospace. And the Google Lunar X Prize was actually launched before that, but has been running for a long time. And we're now approaching the end of the Google Lunar X Prize. The prize money is available till the end of next year.
And this builds on an amazing heritage of people recognizing that sometimes you have to incentivize adventure is not quite the right word, but that's sometimes how it feels. The innovation required to do more, go further, try harder, to innovate something great. And this actually goes all the way back to the Flight of the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic, which was the winning flight to win the Orteig Prize. And that was just $25,000, but when you think back to when it was won, that was a huge sum of money. And the thing about these prizes is when Charles Lindbergh was getting ready to fly across the Atlantic, he fully recognized that while $25,000 was a large sum of money, that wouldn't necessarily cover all the effort, all the flight costs, all of the innovations that were needed. And with the Ansari Prize, with the Northrop Grumman Prize, the Ansari Prize went to the first spacecraft that was able to go up above a certain altitude, basically to reach above the atmosphere and return to Earth twice in a short period of time. The Northrop Grumman Prize was to take your spacecraft, go up into the air for a certain amount of time, either 90 seconds or 180 seconds, return back down, and repeat. All of these prizes require a lot of cost to be invested, and the prize is an incentive only. Do you have any feel for just how much these different teams might have to invest as they reach for the moon?
Roughly speaking, the kinds of missions which we expect these teams to do are in the tens of millions of dollars in cost. The sort of minimum price for a launch vehicle that could get your spacecraft to the moon is already approaching $20 million.
And $20 million is the prize that Google has put forward for the mission that makes it to the moon, travels 500 meters, and sends back high-definition video.
Right, so that's the grand prize. There's also a few other prizes. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a few minutes. But we expect that teams will probably spend more money than that to do the mission, perhaps by a factor of 2 or 2.5 times more.
And What's interesting is as you pointed out, this is a fairly old prize. It's been around for a long time, and there are still FAQs floating around the internet saying we expect to see the first launches in 2013, that the prize will be decreased, in fact, by the end of. This is our second Google Lunar XPRIZE team hangout. Now, tonight, instead of having a team with us, well, there's 18 teams, and all of them are amazingly busy. They're working on preparing their cameras, their landers, all the things you need to get to the moon and rove across it, or walk across it, or fly across it, whatever it takes. Instead, tonight we have with us Andrew Barton, who comes to us from Google Lunar XPRIZE itself. He's here to help us understand what is the Google Lunar XPRIZE, what are the milestones and incentives that these teams are reaching for, and what is it that hopefully we will accomplish through all of this. Andrew has a PhD in mechanical engineering that he got from the University of Sydney. He's worked in governmental space agencies, working at ESTEC, which is part of the European Space Agency in the Netherlands. And he has experience also working in the commercial world, but right now his home is with the Google Lunar XPRIZE, where he works in technical operations. Andrew, welcome to our show. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this evening.
Hi, Pamela. Thanks, and hi to all of the audience. It's great to be with you today. Thanks for joining this hangout. I'd just like to say that just to round out what Pamela was saying, I'm the Director of Technical Operations for the Google Lunar XPRIZE, and
2013 to 15 million. The rules on that have been changed to it gets decreased if a governmental agency lands on the moon. Now, how has this changed, and what are the major factors that have changed the Google Lunar XPRIZE over its history?
That is, all of that old stuff sort of sticks around, so you can find it and dig it up. But the downside is it can be a little bit confusing, I suppose. But essentially, there were lots of people involved, lots of teams, lots of stakeholders, and XPRIZE, had the attitude of, we're not sure we've got it right the first time. We're not perfect. Let's launch this prize and see what happens. And as we go along, we learn certain hidden requirements come out of the woodwork, if you like, and so certain things just needed to be changed. And in fact, we're now on the 4th version of the Master Team Agreement, which is the contract that the teams and XPRIZE sign to basically declare how they're related in this prize competition. And so you've just mentioned a few of the biggest changes that have happened over the years. So the original expiry date was end of 2014. And that was also the prize would have already dropped to $15 million by the end of 2014. It was only originally meant to be the $20 million up until the end of 2012. But of course, as we approached 2012 and it became clear that there weren't any teams ready to go yet, Google and XPRIZE decided to take away that particular rule, and so the prize money was kept at $20 million. And at a